Here's a highlight from a recent episode of Booked on Rock. This episode's guest is Sahan Jayasuriya, the author of Don't Say Please, the oral history of D. Kreutzen. They were into a broad range of music, which you did talk about. They were fans of classic rock bands like KISS, CCR, Zeppelin, AC/DC,
Sure.
Aerosmith.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that I learned, like I came up listening to punk and hardcore. I'm almost 40. I'll be turning 40 in October. So the classic rock thing was not really anything that I really paid much attention to as a young kid. I loved Queen. I was a huge Queen fan. But some of the other bands maybe just they didn't really connect with me, and it wasn't really until later in life that, like, especially like the glam stuff, that really resonated with me. And I think that came from really liking a lot of 70s punk. But a lot of the classic rock stuff didn't resonate with me, and I think it's because I had other punk things to listen to. But the thing that I learned in researching this book and just reading about this period in general is a lot of people who listen to punk and hardcore bands, of course they weren't listening to punk and hardcore because they were helping invent it. So they were listening to the heaviest music available, and the heaviest available was like hard rock and classic rock, and so many people, who are like kind of Gen X age group, they, KISS was a big deal for them. It was like a early influence because it was just like, it was made for teenage kids. They look like cartoon characters, it's just guitar solos and flamethrowers and pinball machines. It makes so much sense for a person of a certain age at a certain time to be a KISS fan, right? So all those things were just like, the edgiest, like gnarliest thing available. And I think so many people who went on to play in punk and hardcore bands definitely did their time listening to, classic rock and glam. And that stuff, I mean, and Sweet and Slade and Bowie, all that stuff is great,
I think it's interesting in reading a lot about grunge bands and how much they were influenced by early Aerosmith and Black Sabbath. I hear that often. Early
100%.
Aerosmith and Black Sabbath.
Yeah, well, I mean, the early Aerosmith records are pretty cool. I mean, especially, the vocalist for Dick Kreutz and Dave Kabinski, he cites Steven Tyler as a huge influence. When he first told me that in person years before I was writing the book, I was just like, I wasn't expecting it because, again, I didn't realize that some of these like people who made punk and hardcore were listening to classic rock. But then I was thinking about it. I was like, well, you think about the end of Dream On, where he's really pushing his voice into like screaming territory. I'm like, oh, that makes sense, But yeah, I mean, the grunge bands. I mean, Kurt Cobain was a huge fan of like a record like Rocks by Aerosmith. He loved that record,
Yeah, it's dirty. It's grungy.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the drum sound of that record rules. That's a great record. I'm not like the world's biggest Aerosmith fan, but they have some records I would definitely dig for sure.